Carlos Medina bought his dream on a Tuesday in March 2021. A two-bedroom condo on the 14th floor in Brickell, Miami, $485,000, views of the bay, the kind of purchase that felt like winning. 3 years later, he stands in his building's parking garage watching a U-Haul back out into the afternoon heat. It's the third one this month. He stops counting after that. Something is leaving Miami. Not just people, something harder to name. Here is the number that should stop every Florida homeowner cold. According to Redfin, Miami-Dade County lost 72,254 more residents than it gained last year. That is not a slow drift. That is the largest net outflow on record for the county, the worst since anyone started keeping track. The United States Census Bureau tells the same story from a different angle, recording a net loss of 10,115 residents in Miami-Dade in its most recent count, with the broader metro shedding tens of thousands more to domestic outmigration. The boom already happened. People came, prices surged, and now, quietly, they're going. To be clear about what that outflow number actually measures, because the comment section always asks, a net outflow counts how many more people left the county than moved into it. The moving trucks going one way minus the moving trucks going the other. For most of the last decade, Miami won that contest easily. Now it is losing it by the widest margin ever logged. Redfin's analysts describe what is happening to places like this as a boomerang. The pandemic-era boom towns that absorbed everyone fleeing New York and Boston in 2021 and 2022 are now watching a share of those same arrivals turn around and leave, because the cheap, sunny, low-tax promise that pulled them in quietly stopped being cheap. But where? And why now? After Miami spent 3 years being called the hottest real estate market in America? This is not some future prediction. This is happening right now, in the listings, in the migration data, in the parking garages. Bank of America flagged it first, naming Miami as the major U.S. metro, with one of the steepest year-over-year drops in homebuyer demand in the country. Not Detroit, not Chicago, Miami. And Redfin's own search data backs the warning with a figure that is hard to argue with. In the final quarter of last year, 31% of Miami homebuyers were searching to leave the metro entirely, while only 2% of buyers across the whole country were searching to move in. Read that ratio twice. Almost a third of the people already there want out, and almost no one outside wants in. Carlos still gets his morning coffee on that 14th floor balcony. The view hasn't changed, but 2 units on his floor are dark now, listed and sitting. He has started doing the math on his own situation, and the math is getting uncomfortable. So what broke first? The dream or the math? Let's start with the number that hit hardest, the insurance bill. For a lot of Miami homeowners, that number arrived without warning. Elena Vasquez is a registered nurse at Jackson Memorial. She earns $67,000 a year, a solid, respectable income in most American cities. In January 2023, she opened a renewal letter for her Edgewater condo and sat down on her kitchen floor. Her property insurance premium had jumped from $3,200 to $9,800. 18 months. 0 claims filed, no renovations, no incidents, no explanation beyond a single line about adjusted risk modeling. $9,800. That's 14.6% of her gross annual salary, gone before rent, groceries, or her car payment. She's not an outlier. Average homeowner insurance premiums across South Florida now exceed $11,000 per year, roughly 3 to 4 times the national average. Since 2022, 6 private insurers have exited Florida entirely, leaving homeowners scrambling towards Citizens Property Insurance, the state's insurer of last resort. Citizens now holds over 1.4 million policies, a record high, and is actively working to shed them, which means pushing those customers back toward whatever private market remains at whatever price it demands. Walk the mechanism through slowly, because this is the part that turns a headline into a moving truck. When global reinsurers, the companies that insure the insurance companies, look at a coastline that now produces billion-dollar storm seasons, they raise the price of covering it. That cost flows straight down to the local carrier, and the local carrier either passes it to Elena or stops writing policies in Florida at all. 6 of them chose to stop. The ones that stayed raised rates to match the new risk math. So Elena's premium did not triple because she did anything wrong. It tripled because an actuary in another country recalculated how often Miami floods, and her renewal letter was simply the messenger. And the bill compounds. A premium that high does not just drain a budget once. It reprices the home itself because the next buyer has to carry that same number, which means they will offer less, which means Elena's equity quietly shrinks every year she holds. The insurance crisis is not only an expense, it is a slow discount applied to the asset. Here's what makes this different from political noise. It's actuarial. Miami sits inside one of the highest hurricane risk corridors on the continent, and Redfin's chief economist, Daryl Fairweather, put a name to what that does to a household. Climate risk, she explained, is becoming a bigger factor in where Americans choose to live, because repeated storms and damage make it more expensive and less predictable to own a home. And when people's bank accounts take the hit through rising premiums and repairs, they start seriously considering somewhere less risky. That is not ideology. That is a reinsurance market repricing reality, and the local premium is simply the invoice. Elena is still doing the math. So far, it doesn't balance, but insurance is only one bill. The second one arrived after Surfside, and nobody saw it coming. On June 24, 2021, the Champlain Towers South building in Surfside, Florida, came down into rubble at 1:22 in the morning. 98 people died. The investigation that followed revealed something the building's residents never knew. The structural warnings had existed for years, buried in engineering reports nobody acted on. Florida's legislature responded with Senate Bill 4D, mandatory structural inspections and fully funded reserves for any condo building 30 years or older, with a deadline of December 2024. The intent was sound, the consequence was a financial earthquake. The logic of the law is hard to argue with. For decades, Florida condo boards kept monthly fees artificially low by quietly underfunding their reserves, the savings accounts that are supposed to pay for roofs, concrete, and structural repair. It made the buildings cheap to live in and dangerous to ignore. Senate Bill 4D ended the pretending in a single stroke. Every aging building suddenly had to inspect itself honestly and fully fund the repairs it had deferred for years. The buildings that got hit hardest were the older oceanfront towers from the 1960s and 1970s, the exact buildings that retirees on fixed incomes bought precisely because they were affordable. The reckoning landed on the people least able to absorb it. On Collins Avenue, a 1970s-era building levied a $112,000 per unit special assessment. Owners had 90 days to respond, not 90 months. 90 days. Dolores Reyes is 71 years old, a retired postal worker who bought her Miami Beach condo in 1997 and paid off the mortgage in 2009. She did everything right. When the assessment notice arrived, she read it 3 times at her kitchen table. The ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, $112,000. She called her daughter in Atlanta. The call lasted 40 minutes. Neither of them had a solution. Across Miami Beach and Brickell, these assessments are ranging from $40,000 to $175,000 per unit, due in lump sums or compressed installment windows. And the market sees it instantly. Prices in affected buildings have dropped 15 to 22% year over year because buyers know exactly why those units are listed and they price the fear in before they ever make an offer. A unit carrying a 6-figure assessment is not really a 2-bedroom condo anymore. It is a 2-bedroom condo with a bill attached, and every buyer subtracts that bill from what they are willing to pay. The listing price tells one story, the math underneath it tells another. Owners like Dolores aren't selling because they want to leave. They're selling because staying has become mathematically impossible. So owners are getting squeezed from every direction. But what about the renters who were supposed to be priced into buying? Where did they go? They went to Charlotte or Tampa or anywhere the numbers made sense. Miami's median rent climbed to roughly $2,850 a month, one of the worst rent-to-income ratios of any major U.S. metro, according to Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies. The city's median household income sits around $59,000. Run the arithmetic. A household earning that median would need to hand over close to 58% of their gross income just to cover rent. The threshold that defines housing stress is 30%. Miami blew past that years ago and kept going. Picture a middle school teacher in Miami-Dade, $52,000 salary, 12 years in the classroom. One evening, she sits at her kitchen table with a napkin and a pen. Rent, $2,400 for a one-bedroom in Hialeah. Car insurance, student loans, groceries. She gets to the bottom of the napkin and circles what's left, $180. That's not a budget, that's a countdown. She took a job in Charlotte 6 weeks later. She's not exceptional, she's the pattern. Redfin's migration data shows exactly where Miami's leavers are pointing their searches, and the top destination is Cape Coral, just up the coast, followed by Orlando, and, tellingly, Minneapolis, a city that could not be further from Miami in climate or cost. IRS migration records fill in the rest of the map. Outmigrants landing in Broward and Palm Beach first, then Tampa, then Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. These aren't retirees cashing out equity. These are the people who staff the hospitals, teach the children, and run the restaurants. That distinction is the whole ball game. When a retiree sells a paid-off condo and moves on, the city loses a resident. When a 38-year-old nurse or a 12-year teacher leaves, the city loses a worker it cannot easily replace, because the salary the job pays no longer covers the cost of living in the place that needs it done. Cape Coral, 2 hours up the Gulf Coast, offers a version of Florida those workers can still afford, which is exactly why Redfin shows it sitting at the top of the list of where Miami's leavers are looking. They are not abandoning the dream of Florida, they are just driving until the numbers forgive them. If you've made it this far into the story, you're already paying closer attention than most people who scrolled past this video. So let me give you the part the headlines keep missing. The people leaving are not the problem on their own. The problem is who is supposed to replace them and whether those buyers exist at all. Because here's the twist that Bank of America's data makes unavoidable. The buyers who were supposed to step in aren't showing up either. Bank of America's homebuyer demand index doesn't deal in sentiment. It tracks actual purchase activity, metro by metro. And when their analysts ran the year-over-year numbers, Miami landed at the bottom of every major U.S. market, among the steepest drops in buyer activity of any tracked metro in the country. Not a struggling Rust Belt city. Miami. The listing data confirms it, and this is where the slowdown stops being a feeling and becomes a measurement. According to Redfin, homes in the city of Miami now sit on the market for roughly 113 days before selling, up from about 100 days a year earlier. Statewide, the picture is the same story at scale. Across Florida, around 200,000 homes are listed for sale, and more than 1 in 5 of them have already taken a price cut. Sellers are no longer naming a price and waiting for the bidding war. They are listing, sitting, and slashing. Zillow tells the value side of the same story. The typical Miami home is now worth about $581,000, down 1.2% over the past year, and it takes around 56 days just to go pending. That is not appreciation. That is a market quietly leaking value, while the headlines still call it red hot. A year ago, parts of this metro were down more than 3% on Zillow's index. The slide is real, even if it is slow. Now here is the honest caveat, the part that keeps this credible when someone tries to fact-check it in the comments. This is not a statewide route. Zooming out, Florida's median price is actually up a little over the past year. And statewide, the share of listings taking a price cut has eased slightly from where it sat a year ago. Nationally, Zillow still expects home values to rise modestly over the next 12 months. So the country is not breaking, and Florida as a whole is steadier than the panic headlines suggest. What you are looking at instead is a concentration of pressure. The pain is not evenly spread across the state. It is pooling in the exact places where the 4 bills land together: high insurance, heavy condo assessments, brutal rent-to-income, and vanished investor demand, and Miami is sitting directly over that drain. Sandra Morales has been listing properties in Coral Gables for 19 years. She showed one $1.1 million home 11 times over 90 days. 11 showings, 0 offers. 2 years ago, she said quietly, after the last walkthrough, this would have been gone in a weekend. If you're trying to figure out which Florida markets still actually pencil out and which ones are quietly breaking under exactly this kind of pressure, I pulled everything I have been tracking into one place. It's the Florida Buy and Avoid list for 2026. 40 towns reviewed, 20 to buy and 20 to avoid, with the same insurance, inventory, and migration signals you're watching unfold here. It's linked down in the description whenever you want it. But stay right here, because the next number is the one that finally explains what all of this is doing to a city from the inside, and it's the part almost nobody talks about. The pandemic investor wave, remote workers, Latin American capital flight buyers, short-term rental speculators has pulled back hard. Airbnb saturation in Miami Beach pushed average nightly rates down sharply, and once the nightly math stopped working, the cash flow logic that justified those purchases stopped working with it. The speculators who held the floor under prices simply stepped away from the table. Put those two facts side by side. Miami is losing the residents who sustain demand, and it is losing the buyers who are supposed to absorb the supply they leave behind. That's not a correction, that's a structural reset. So, where does this leave Carlos, still on that 14th floor, still watching the U-Hauls, and what does his next move actually look like? Carlos ran the numbers one final time on a Sunday night, the bay glittering below him, the unit quiet, mortgage, insurance, HOA fees, and his building's new reserve contribution, $4,900 a month. His condo is worth roughly what he paid for it in 2021, which Zillow's softening value index makes painfully plausible. No appreciation, no equity growth, just $4,900 a month to stay exactly where he started. He did the comparison that thousands of his neighbors were doing at the same time. Almost $5,000 a month to tread water in a market that no longer pays him to stay, or a fraction of that to own outright somewhere 2 states north. Phrased that way, it stopped being an emotional decision about leaving home and became a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet had already decided. He does not owe more than the place is worth, but he isn't building anything either. That distinction matters more than it sounds. Because the headline census loss of around 10,000 residents from Miami-Dade isn't by itself a catastrophe in raw numbers. Cities absorb small losses all the time. What's catastrophic is the Redfin figure underneath it, more than 70,000 net leavers in a single year, the most the county has ever recorded, because that number represents the erosion of critical mass. The teachers, the nurses, the line cooks, the mid-career professionals who quietly sustain demand for everything else in the city. When enough of them leave, the place doesn't break in some dramatic single event. It hollows, slowly from the inside, one resignation letter and one moving truck at a time. And here's the reframe that ties all of this together. This was never about Miami being undesirable. Miami is still stunning. The bay still glitters, the food is still extraordinary, the winters are still warm, the skyline still sells itself. Redfin's own data confirms people still dream about it. What changed is that Miami became unaffordable to the exact people who made it desirable in the first place, and the insurance, the assessments, the rent, and the vanished buyers all arrived at the same moment, and the math caught up faster than anyone planned for. That's the quiet engine running underneath every U-Haul Carlos counts. Not a single dramatic event, 1,000 kitchen table calculations, all landing on the same answer in the same year. Before the last beat of this, I want to hear from you, because the comments on these are always sharper than the data. What's your situation right now? Are you holding, selling, or already gone? And if the cost of staying somewhere finally pushed you out, drop the number that broke it, the premium, the assessment, the rent, because someone scrolling this video is sitting at their own kitchen table doing the same math tonight. And your story is the thing that tells them they're not crazy. Carlos listed his condo on a Monday morning, not in panic, in clarity. He said it simply without bitterness. I didn't leave Miami. Miami left me. He's right. And if you want to stay ahead of which Florida markets are about to feel exactly what Brickell is feeling now, the next metros where the same four bills land at the same time, subscribe and stay with this channel because that breakdown is coming, and the early warning signs are already showing up in the data. If you're watching this from a Sunbelt city still riding its boom, still calling itself the next Miami, that sentence of his is worth sitting with, because the next one on this list might be yours.